According to our records, you're dead." "What?" The manager turned the monitor around. A red notice filled the screen. "Deceased." John slid his driver's license across the counter. "I'm standing right here." The manager checked the ID, then he stopped typing. Whatever he was looking at now, it wasn't the death notice. "What's wrong?" The manager looked back at the screen. He wasn't looking at the death notice anymore. He was reading something else. "John." "What?" "I don't think the death notice is the problem. The death hadn't come from the bank. It had come from the county, a real certificate, filed and stamped, with a funeral home named at the bottom. So that's where John went." The director pulled a folder and opened it. A service date, a casket, the model, the price, the line where someone had signed for it, a plot, section, row, number. John stared at the page. There was a grave, his name on the stone, and something in the ground beneath it. Not a flag in a computer, not a number in the wrong box, a casket, a burial, a place he could drive to and stand over. For a long moment, John couldn't speak. Then barely. "Who arranged this?" The director turned the folder around. His finger stopped on the authorization line. It hadn't come from family. It had come from the county. John didn't go home. He went to the land. He'd worked that field at sunrise. By afternoon, there was a truck parked in it that wasn't his. Survey stakes cut across the south pasture, orange ribbons snapping in the wind. Near the gate stood a sign he'd never seen before. Webb Development. John parked and got out. A man in a safety vest started toward him immediately. "Sir, this is private property." John looked past him, at the field, at the fence line, at the ground his family had worked for generations. "This is my land." The man almost laughed. Then he realized John was serious. "Not anymore, it isn't." John said nothing. "Webb owns it now," the man continued. "Closed a few weeks ago, right around the time John Whitaker had supposedly died." The worker lowered his voice. "Honestly? Mr. Webb's been trying to buy this parcel for years." John looked back at the sign. Webb Development. For years, Webb had wanted the farm. And somehow, he didn't get it until John was dead. John wanted to look the man in the eye. Webb wasn't hard to find. His name was on half the new construction in the county. Getting near him was another matter. A receptionist, a closed door, then a business card slid across a desk. "Mr. Webb doesn't discuss acquisitions directly. You'll want his attorney." The name on the card, Dale Renner. John didn't stop there. He started asking questions. Old neighbors, the co-op, anyone who'd ever dealt with Webb. The story came back the same every time. Webb had wanted that parcel for years, made offers, sent letters, got told no, over and over. Then the moment John Whitaker was dead on paper, the farm was suddenly his. But it wasn't Webb's name that kept appearing. It was Renner's, the death certificate, the probate filing, the transfer that handed the farm to Webb. One signature sat at the bottom of all three. Dale Renner. The same signature that buried John had also sold his land. John went straight to Webb. "You had me declared dead to take my land." Webb stood up slowly. "I bought your land," he said. "At a county estate sale. Legally." "Legally?" John laughed. "A living man gets buried, his farm gets sold, and that's your defense." Webb didn't answer. Instead, he walked to a cabinet, pulled out a folder, and laid the contents across the desk. The auction listing, the title report, the escrow records, the wire transfer, the closing documents. Every page looked clean. Every signature was in place. Every approval had already been given. "I ran every check a man can run," Webb said. "The county listed an estate. The title came back clean. Your name wasn't attached to any of it." John looked down at the paperwork. That didn't make Webb look innocent. If anything, it made him look prepared. "You've wanted that farm for years." "I have. And the moment I'm dead, you get it." For the first time, Webb looked away. "And now I'm about to lose it." John frowned. Webb pointed at the documents spread across the desk. "The sale's already collapsing. My attorneys know it. The county knows it. The second you walked into that bank alive, everything started coming apart." He sank into his chair. "The money is tied up. The crews are sitting idle. The permits are worthless if the deed gets overturned." This wasn't the look of a man celebrating a victory. It was the look of a man watching one disappear. John looked back at the paperwork, then at Webb, then at the signatures, the county, the funeral home, the estate sale, different places, different people, the same records, the same approvals, the same story. And suddenly the question wasn't who bought the farm. It was who had made the entire county believe John Whitaker was dead. Because whatever this was, it had started long before Webb ever saw the land. If somebody inside that office had done it once, they could have done it before. John started pulling old estate records, quiet sales, fast sales, properties that seemed to change hands overnight. Most of them went nowhere. One led to a man named Earl. On paper, Earl had been dead for years. In reality, he was sitting in a rented room on the edge of town, alive. When John explained why he'd come, Earl didn't look surprised. That was the part that chilled him. He looked tired. "Let me guess," Earl said. "You walked into your bank, and they told you you were dead." John said nothing. He didn't have to. Years earlier, the same thing had happened to Earl. He'd spent months proving he was alive. Eventually, the state corrected the record, but the land never came back. "They called it a computer error," Earl said. "A glitch." He laughed. Low, bitter. Funny how glitches always seem to help somebody. Then he walked to a closet and dragged out a cardboard box. Inside were years of paperwork, the death certificate, the estate records, the transfer documents. John started turning pages, and that's when he saw it. The same path, the same pattern, the same office stamp. Two men, years apart, both declared dead, both stripped of their land, both processed through the same office. The stamp had a name behind it. It always had. John didn't want to believe it when he found it. Neither did anyone else. Eleanor Pruitt had run the county records office for 34 years. She'd notarized marriages, handled estates, remembered people's names. Years earlier, she'd handed John his own father's papers with a cup of coffee and a kind word. She was the last person in the county anyone would suspect, which was exactly why nobody had. Every death certificate, every estate sale, every transfer, Earl's, John's, and all the quiet ones in between. They didn't just pass through her office. They came from her desk. She wasn't a glitch in the system. She was the system. The hand the bank trusted. The hand the funeral home trusted. The hand the county trusted. For 34 years, when Eleanor Pruitt's records said a man was dead, people believed her. And for 34 years, she'd been careful, patient, invisible. A small estate here, an isolated victim there. Never enough to draw attention, never enough to make anyone look twice. That was what bothered John, because his case wasn't careful, it wasn't patient, it wasn't invisible. His death had been rushed. The paperwork moved too fast. The sale moved too fast. Everything about it felt different. Earl's case had taken time. John's had been shoved through in a hurry. After 34 years of covering her tracks, Eleanor Pruitt had suddenly broken her own pattern, and she had done it for one reason: John Whitaker. The question wasn't who anymore. It was why. Why had a woman who spent decades staying invisible suddenly risked everything for him? The answer was 34 years old. The same 34 years Eleanor Pruitt had spent behind that desk. John pulled his father's estate file, the one she'd handed him herself years ago. Back then, he'd never had a reason to read it closely. Now he did. Page after page, signature after signature. Most of it looked ordinary. until one detail didn't, then another, and another. The deeper he dug, the clearer the picture became. This hadn't started with him. It had started with his father. When John's father died, decades earlier, Eleanor had handled the estate herself, early in her career, long before anyone knew her name, long before anyone had a reason to question it. Something in that file didn't belong there. A transfer that shouldn't have happened. A piece of property that moved where it never should have gone. Small enough to escape attention, big enough to matter. The kind of mistake that becomes dangerous when someone starts asking questions. And for 34 years, nobody did. The file stayed buried. The farm passed to John. The paperwork stayed untouched. Eleanor stayed safe. Then John made a simple decision. He decided to put the farm in his daughter's name. A routine transfer. Nothing more. Except a transfer like that forces a full title search. Every deed, every estate, every record tied to the land, all the way back to his father's file. The file Eleanor had spent 34 years hoping nobody would ever reopen. The moment that search began, her clock started running. If the file surfaced, so did her first theft. If her first theft surfaced, everything that came after it would start to unravel. So she moved, fast. For the first time in decades, she stopped being patient. She declared John dead, opened his estate, and tried to bury the one file that connected her to where it all began. That's when John finally understood. His death had never been about the farm. It had never been about Webb. It had never even been about money. It was about a decision Eleanor Pruitt made 34 years earlier, a decision she thought had stayed buried, until the day John tried to protect his daughter. It came apart the same way it had been built, one document at a time. Because John was alive, the estate couldn't stay closed, and the moment it reopened, the file Eleanor had spent 34 years protecting came with it. His father's file, the one she never thought anyone would read closely. This time, people did. And once they found the first discrepancy, the rest followed. Earl's case, the quiet estate sales, the missing properties, the deaths that only existed on paper. For decades, it had all run through the same desk, the same stamp, the same trusted name. Eleanor Pruitt was arrested at the county office she'd run for 34 years. Some people still refused to believe it. For years, that disbelief had protected her. Now it couldn't. The state officially restored John Whitaker's records. The death certificate was voided. The estate was reopened. And for the first time in months, the law finally agreed with what had been standing in front of it all along. John Whitaker was alive. The sale of the farm was overturned. Webb lost the property, a great deal of money with it, but he lost something else too, the suspicion. Because in the end, he hadn't stolen a farm. He'd been sold one. By the time it was over, he and John shook hands as two men who had been caught in the same lie. And then John finished the one thing he'd started before any of this happened. Months earlier, he'd made a simple decision. He wanted the farm to pass to his daughter. That decision had nearly gotten him erased. It had exposed a secret buried for 34 years, and it had brought down the woman who built her life, protecting it. The transfer Eleanor Pruitt had tried so hard to stop happened anyway. The farm went to John's daughter, exactly as he'd always intended. And in the end, the woman who spent 3 decades trying to bury the truth was undone by the one man she couldn't keep buried.